Cuba is mourning its revolutionary leader Fidel Castro, whose death was announced late on Friday. Flags are flying at half-mast as 9 days of mourning are observed. From Monday, people will be able to pay respects before the ashes of the 90-year-old are taken to Santiago de Cuba, where he launched his bid for power. There were further celebrations in the U.S. city of Miami, however, where many anti-Castro Cuban exiles and their families have settled. Some world leaders have been paying tribute to the 20th century icon. But U.S. President-elect Donald Trump said Castro had been a brutal dictator. Castro came to power in 1959 and ushered in a communist revolution, defying the U.S. for decades. His supporters viewed him as a man who stood up to America during the Cold War and returned Cuba to the people. His critics, however, called him a dictator. The U.S. cut ties with Cuba in 1961 amid rising Cold War tensions and imposed a strict economic embargo which largely remains in place more than half a century on. Under President Barack Obama, the relationship warmed and diplomatic ties were restored in 2015. Mr. Obama said history would record and judge the enormous impact of Castro. America was extending a hand of friendship to the Cuban people at this time, he added. A mourning period began on Saturday and will be observed in Cuba until the urn with Castro's ashes is taken to the southeastern city of Santiago de Cuba to be laid to rest there on 4 December. Before that, a series of memorials will be held in Havana and Castro's ashes will travel along the route of the Caravan of Freedom that took place in January 1959. Castro was the longest-serving non-royal leader of the 20th century. He had been retired from political life for several years, after handing power to his brother Raúl in 2006 because of illness. Many world leaders have paid tribute to Castro. Russian President Vladimir Putin described him as a reliable and sincere friend of Russia, while Chinese President Xi Jinping said his people had lost a good and true comrade. The Soviet Union's last leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, said, "Fidel stood up and strengthened his country during the harshest American blockade, when there was colossal pressure on him." Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came under fire on social media and from political opponents for describing Castro as a remarkable leader, who despite being a controversial figure made significant improvements to the education and healthcare of Cubans. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon acknowledged advances in education, literacy and health under Castro, but said he hoped Cuba would continue to advance on a path of reform, greater prosperity and human rights. Pope Francis, who met Castro, an atheist, when he visited Cuba in 2015, called his death sad news. In Venezuela, Cuba's main regional ally, President Nicolas Maduro said revolutionaries of the world must follow his legacy,